Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. A few months ago I started having a video debate with a guy named Potholer who had made some utterly ludicrous assertions in his videos. When I pointed out the problems to him, instead of just admitting that he was wrong like an honest person would have done, he instead dug his heels in, started making straw man arguments, got very arrogant, and declared himself the winner. And then, because he declared himself the winner, many of his scientifically illiterate followers assumed that it was correct, and they keep posting comments on my YouTube site saying things like, "Potholer destroyed you." So I'm just going to do a short video again pointing out the absurdity of his arguments. Here's what he said in his silly BBC accent.
In my video, The Ice Age, I said there was a trigger that set off a vicious circle of events, each tipping the Earth into a cooling or a warming phase. In scientific terms, the vicious circle is called positive feedback, and it's best explained by looking at some weights on a balanced plank. If the weights are equidistant from the pivot point, the plank is in balance. A slight offset will tilt the plank, but it won't upset the balance. But let's say one of the weights is round and is moved half an inch. This causes the plank to tilt slightly. But the tilt causes the weight to roll a bit, and the shift in position causes the plank to tilt a bit more, until soon there's a runaway event and the plank comes crashing to the ground. We know that similar positive feedback happened during the ice ages. Each cooling and warming phase is amplified, so that a tiny bit of cooling ends up freezing half the planet, and a tiny bit of warming ends up thawing it out again. But each time something had to act as that initial trigger. Something had to nudge the round weight just a fraction. A strong contender has always been regular cyclical deviation in the Earth's position or orbit, changing the amount of sunlight the Earth received. Whatever it was, in the depths of the Ice Age, this change melted a tiny part of the ice sheet and released carbon gases from the soil and from the warmer oceans. The carbon gases that were released trapped more long-wave radiation and warmed the planet a bit more, and that released more carbon gases, and so on. Climate change proponents have never suggested that a carbon dioxide increase was the trigger for past warming, only that the trigger released carbon gases, which set off this vicious circle of heating.
So Potholer's argument boils down to the idea that a little tiny nudge caused by changes in orbital cycles starts and ends ice ages. But then he says you start getting feedbacks caused by carbon dioxide and methane being released from the ground, and this starts accelerating it faster and faster until it comes, as he described it, crashing into the ground. But he never explains what crashing into the ground means. Crashing into the ground implies that a very strong force stopped a runaway feedback effect. So he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He wants you to believe that a tiny nudge from orbital cycles starts and stops ice ages. But he also wants you to believe that there's some very strong and completely undefined force which stops this runaway feedback effect when it crashes into the ground. And once the teeter-totter is completely whacked out and crashed into the ground like this, how did it get back in balance? He didn't make any attempt to explain that. Obviously it would take a very strong force to recover from the broken state of his diagram. His argument is totally ambiguous gibberish and completely scientifically unsupportable. He can't say that a tiny little force stops ice ages, and at the same time saying that a very strong force stops ice ages. So here's my experiment I want him to try. He should put a 300-pound guy on one side of the teeter-totter, get it in balance, then give him a little nudge, and as the teeter-totter accelerates faster and faster towards the ground, he should stick his little pinky finger between the end of the teeter-totter and the ground and give it a tiny little nudge up to stop the motion downward. Then he can report back to us about how that worked out. I doubt that Potholer is dumb enough to try this obviously disastrous experiment which will completely undermine his theory, but some of his followers may well be willing to try it, and I hope they report back to us. Well, I'll be looking forward to hearing how it worked out. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.